Massive hello to everybody. This is 50 pips rocking and rolling here. 31st/01/2016. No trade calls and recommendations or response for their own stuff. We're here for educational purposes only. The fact that you're listening to this means you've read, you understand, you accept all disclaimers here on the website and everywhere else. Understand that we're just performing some live technical analysis in a learning context for education purposes only. So again, I hope everybody's having an awesome weekend. Let's see what we've got stacked up here for the month of February. So as we go into the new month, it should be a fairly interesting week just to see how we end up following the close of January. Keep in mind that we've got quite a lot of stuff on the data front. We got China news, we got all those PMIs. We're going to have a cash rate, so an RBA on the wires. We're going to have unemployment out of New Zealand. We've got a lot of still have BOJ on the wires. We're going to have ECB Draghi speaking on Thursday. We've got BOE inflation report. We've got those MPC official bank rate votes with some more press conferences with Carney, unemployment claims out of the U.S., and again a bunch of data on Friday with a non-farm just to end the week. So it'll be fairly interesting week. Now for the kind of useless random fact, or I don't know, but just for the hell's sake, what's first trading day in February? Dow, S&P, and Nasdaq have been up 11 out of the last 13 occurrences. So let's see what that brings. And the way we closed on Friday, you would expect to see a little bit more upside, or at least some kind of gap up action on equities. So what's going on? I think here again the focus is on equities, right? And what we were discussing was about that, nothing tends to only go in a straight line. So we were looking for bounces, right? So if you look at the ES, we came back in, we got that bounce, we get that nice, very aggressive positive weekly close, right? And now we've had a second positive weekly close. So everything's pointing to a nice little bounce in this area. If you look at, let's look at something else. If you look at the Dow, again, double positive, very aggressive weekly close, right? Nice basing action. If you look at the Nasdaq, again, second week positive close. They all look like they're coiling, right? So the big question is, how far are they going to pop before people try to sell these back down, or is this really an important bottom? We'll have to wait and see. As always, we'll just have to let the market guide us. So what I'm going to do, just in terms of to try and keep this fairly short, not to keep this too long, instead of focusing on all of the charts, I'm going to focus on the ES, right? So if we look at the ES, when you see this basing action, everything's pointing to a ramp back up into that whole 1995. You've got that 100 DMA coming in right in that zone. You're going to have the 50 coming back down, probably come into this area. So that's going to be kind of a very interesting area to look at if we continue to squeeze higher. Now, one thing I would be very cautious about, right, and let's get a new chart, is that I think everybody is looking for this to sell off again, and everybody's is looking to really sell this aggressively. So the question is, is this going to surprise and really rip up or not? I think I prefer, instead of trying to have a bias, I prefer to just look at the chart. And what the chart is telling me is that there is no reason why this can't come all the way back up into that high range, 2050s, 2060s, and still be in a bearish formation, right? All things being equal, you would expect that if the move is strong, you would expect sellers to come in, ahead of the 50 back of this move down. So if you look at it that way, the 50 back is coming in at the 1954. And if we're just looking at support and resistance areas, I think it's fairly clear that that big break, this is the right here, as we shade here, this is the breakdown zone, right? So if we put in another line here at this breakdown area, right, you've got those 1979. So I think all things being equal, you'd expect to see an awful lot of selling interest coming in around this range, okay? And if we, let's just put that 100 DMA, which we talked about earlier, right? And you see it's going to be coming around that range. So I think that's really the first interesting zone, the first interesting sell zone. Now, again, that's going to be, as far as I'm concerned, the pivotal line for the week. As long as we keep on getting daily closes below that level, we can continue to see moves back to the downside. If we rip back above that zone, then I would expect, daily closes above 1979s, then I would expect that we need to probe much higher back into the 2050 range. Okay. One thing I would say, and the similar way that this played out, these are really tricky markets to trade, especially if you're trying to, whether you're trying to get back short or you're trying to ride a swing, because once you get such an aggressive weekly range in, right, as long as you don't trade outside of that weekly range, it's kind of much to do about nothing, right? So right here, we've put in this other range. So how would I look at this, at least short term going into the week? What I would focus in is going on a daily, right? And right here, as long as the market doesn't come back down and close below that Friday low, right, chances are we've still got more upside, right? If we start to close back below that level, then things would turn, then this could start to get quite heavy again. But as long as that level holds, I would expect to see continued the dips being fairly shallow and getting bought for a rotation back higher into that mid-range, okay? So that's the way I'm looking for the ES. If anybody has any questions, again, just hit me up on Twitter. We'll try and talk this through, but expect to see maybe some kind of gap up action this in the open on Sunday. And again, I think everybody's just looking to sell it, but the question is, when everybody's just on the same side of the trade, it could surprise. Another thing to keep an eye out for is Euro JPY, right? We talked about the fact that we were looking at this base possible pop all the way back up into the upside of the channel. We said it made sense to try and stay aggressively long into the BOJ meeting. And again, we still have some kind of upside. Be careful if we get too extended. You'll probably see some sellers coming in, but be cautious in general, all this JPYs, because you'll probably have trapped shorts trying to get out on any dip, so we probably have a little bit more upside to go. So this trade on USD JPY is done pretty much in terms of the percentage move. What I'd be looking at going into this week is this 22 level being pivotal, right? As long as the market doesn't close back below there, back above, sorry, we could see some two-sided action. If we close above there, then I would expect those 125s to come rather quickly. And then on the other end, I would be looking at the 121s. If we close below the 121s, then we could see some more downside. But right here, consider this whole 122, 121 as a big chop range. And what I think is going to be very interesting for short-term Momo and flows is going to be daily closes above or below these levels. Now, one other thing I'd like to draw your attention to, which I think is interesting in terms of USD JPY, which you may or may not want to keep an eye out for. Keep an eye that you got that 200 DMA coming in there. So again, I think a lot of shorts still wanting to stay bearish here, but I think if we start get daily closes back above that 200, a lot of the system traders are going to have to flip long or go neutral. So I'd be very, very cautious there again. So something else to look at, which could be interesting. Again, I'm trying to keep these updates not too long. Crude, again, no big change. We're looking for some kind of a bottom. We're looking for 3770s to print. No change, right? So this has been very, very technical. Again, a lot of choppy action. Be very careful with this, because all it takes is one headline on the wires to really rip this up or down a couple of bucks. It's very tricky, but all things being equal, we would expect the same way as the BOJ was talking into those 116s. We posted it on Twitter. We said 116.50, 116.00 was a buy. The way we're starting to get in terms of commentary and everything of those lows, it feels like everybody's very edgy, and you'll probably continue to see stuff hitting the wires if we get too low. So I think right now the path of least resistance is either some sideways uber choppy territory, but probably dips get bought to ultimately try and move price back towards these 3770s, and then that's going to be the next pivotal range. So to the upside, I'd be looking at those 3770s. To the downside, I'd be looking at those 2930s. But again, expect this to be very, very choppy. Another thing, since we have, actually, let's look at that. Since we got the RBA on the wires this week, what's going on Aussie and Kiwi? I mean, on Aussie, if you look at Aussie, it's we've got to move. You know, we're looking at these lows down here for this to be a failed break of these lows and this positive. Failed break of these lows and these positive action, this daily positive close back above this range to be a pretty high odds move back into the 71, 70, 90, 71 range. And right here, we've got a pretty much a negative close right at mid range. If you look at that in terms of something like, let's see, where's our other chart? If you look at something with the moving averages on your chart, I thought I had the chart. Here it is, the chart. It's pretty, it's pretty pure for the bears. They'll be looking at this and saying, this is as pure as it gets. Sell back into these two moving averages. We're going back down. I think it's not so clear, personally. I think the break here is not so clear. I think we may still have some room to the upside. Technically, it's still bearish, and the sellers are coming in exactly where they're supposed to be. So I think, what I would be looking at in terms of downside for the week, this low is still the low end of the range. Where we're trading here, mid-range, pivotal for Momo and flows, back up 200 DMA coming in calling, right? If you go back on that other chart we were focused on, you see it pretty much comes in line with this chart. So I think right here we're at a big pivotal zone. So look at daily closes back above or below that 71 mark to be key. And again, there'll be a lot of wheeling and dealing. It should be interesting. It should be interesting. I think it's almost a bit too clear. So I'd be cautious on that. And last but not least, what's going on the Kiwi chart? What's happening on Kiwi? It just seems very strange, because even when everything else is starting to get a bid, it looks like for some reason it's holding heavy, right? So I don't know who's selling this. I don't know if these RB and Z trying to keep a lid on this, but basically we came right back down and we said this was the big pivotal zone, right? So it just seems to have a lot of selling pressure here. I think as long as we don't take out this downside, as long as we don't print back below, the risk here is still for a correction back into the 6660s. I don't know what forces or what volume or what flows are keeping this heavy. Clearly it's heavy, but I think it's a tricky one to call, because unless we don't close back below those lows, I think the path of least resistance is still, especially if crude catches a bid, if equities catches a bid, for this to try to move back into mid-range, and then that's going to be the pivotal mark still inside this very familiar territory. Okay, so guys, as usual, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for sharing the content. More people like this, the more it encourages us to do more. We'll keep on trying to do, as I said, trying to keep a monthly rhythm to do those live Sunday webinars too. So we'll keep on doing those. Again, have an awesome one. Thanks for listening, and heads up for the open. It should be an interesting one. Hopefully, it's going to be a very interesting week for everybody. Have an awesome one. Take care. Bye-bye, guys.